I think I work in several contexts, and for instance, I'm working on 3 projects, and one is a public art project that's taking place in a city, in an abandoned building in Philadelphia during a brownfields conference. It's a temporary public art project. So that's one context. Another context is in a major museum in New York City. And then another one is in a museum in Berkeley, but the project is taking place on the university campus. So the museum is embedded in the university, so we actually are trying to kind of branch out into the university. So I feel like those 3 projects really embody the different contexts that I work in. And I'm part of a collective, so I work with several other artists and practitioners. Some are gardeners, some are architects, graphic designers, and other artists. I mean, I think, I basically grew up here. I moved here when I was 18, and I think it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I felt I wanted to commit myself to this place. This is where I was like, this is my home, this is where I live. I'm gonna live here for the rest of my life. And with that commitment came this desire to make this place a livable city, a rich community. And a concern of mine in that decision was that I felt like there needed to be support in getting healthy food in the city. It's really expensive. I mean, one of the concerns about the Bay Area is how expensive it is, and I think that has driven a lot of my most recent work. And kind of the kernel of interest for me was looking at food and how many people I knew didn't have time to buy food, or they didn't have space to grow food. And so a project that I worked on starting about 5 years ago was looking at how can we work with the city to actually understand how to grow food in the city and support that. And I think a big part of my practice right now has been looking at historical models as inspiration, and I've found that I've kind of done that a couple times now in projects, and I've found that if something worked in the past, or if something was proposed in the past but didn't actually come to fruition, but still exists in a proposal form, it's a very helpful tool to use to present to a city or to present in a contemporary context. For instance, I started thinking about food in cities, and I was reading this book called The History of Community Gardening in America by Laura Lawson, and it was looking at the successes and failures of community gardens, which I think is a really interesting way to write about things, not just the successes, but to learn about the failures. And in that book, she had a really intensive case study of the history of victory gardens in World War I and World War II. And I think the most prominent fact in that book was that during this program, 20 million people became farmers, and that this was just kind of pushed from the government through free seeds and propaganda to become part of a national effort of raising food. I mean, there are definitely lots of nationalistic implications in that, but I think kind of erasing that part and looking at the fact that people got into growing food and grew 40% of our entire food in the country in backyards and roofs was seminal. And so I took that model, and I found a lot of historical documents and accounts of different cities that had participated in this, and kind of took that to the city of San Francisco with a plea for them to kind of reenact that Victory Garden program. And having there be a historical precedent, the city kind of got it immediately, and I realized that that has become a key in a lot of sort of civic-minded work, that city officials, if they see something that's already happened, they almost feel guilty that they're not doing it. And as you can see now, many cities are competing to be the greenest city in America. And through this sort of competition, they put pressure on each other, not even really knowing it. For instance, Philadelphia is trying to be the greenest city by 2015. And they just, Mayor Nutter just recently gave 5 acres of land to this farm. It's called Marathon Farm. You know, the city needs to have more gardens. And San Francisco caught wind of that, and right now a big issue in San Francisco is access to open space land and this question of can we preserve land as agricultural land trusts that, you know, will never be developed on. San Francisco caught wind that Philadelphia is giving away land, and so now there's this kind of urgency in the public land trust to have a conversation about land access. I mean, I think it builds off of that, for sure, especially with the Victory Garden program. I mean, the thing that was so powerful about the Victory Garden program was, of course, the timing where we were in a time of war. Farmers were off at war, and they weren't farming, so there was nobody to grow food. People were hungry, and they were depressed because many of their loved ones were off fighting in a war. And I think, you know, that's this perfect moment. We've seen lots of examples of that where when, you know, there's a low point in the country, there's always a distraction. Not that that's what I'm building upon, but I think the thing that they used was visual propaganda. This was like, you know, during the WPA, so they were hiring all these artists to make these beautiful posters and slogans, and they were very sensuous. They were these images of women farming in long dresses. Lady Liberty became this like bountiful farmer. And I think as a visual artist, I was captivated by those images. So in the Victory Gardens, I tried to kind of create a similar visual campaign. And some was printed matter, and some was more sculptural. And I think of the sort of propaganda that was created for that project as these playful invitations to something, you know, a playful invitation to talk about something that's not necessarily so playful. And maybe that's a lure. It's a similar kind of propaganda. And I think that's something that runs throughout our work a lot, is using play or maybe a softer entry point into a space where we're actually talking about really intense issues and inviting different practitioners to have various perspectives on a very focused